Crime scene cleanup crew members of Reddit, what is your most disturbing story? Hey, search and rescue personnel here. Working in Las Vegas, we see a ton of really messed up stuff. Chances are pretty high that if we're looking for a missing person, we'll find an unrelated subject. Worst one was when we were deployed to find a female stuffed in a suitcase. After recovering the female in the suitcase, the coroner said it was the wrong female in a suitcase and we were sent back out to find the right one. I guess I should clarify, though we aren't a cleanup crew, we are often tasked with body recovery. The coroner's office does the packaging and does the investigation, we then solemnly carry them out. Everyone needs to come home eventually, there's someone out there who cares for them. Man, this really gives me second thoughts about trying to go to Vegas. Imagine being up there in the underverse, looking at the forensics, picking out a suitcase and realizing it's not you inside it but some other lass that died the same way you did. You'll find that everywhere you go on this earth there are people ranging from golden to wholesome to a little shady to downright evil. You won't see this stuff unless you wander way off the normal paths, even then a trained observer might miss them. Unless you get mixed up in the wrong business, you'll be just fine. Home is Colorado, but the cost of living is so cheap it's hard to say no. I heard a story of a guy who cleans up bodies from people jumping in front of trains. In this one case they found a body with no head and couldn't for the life of them find the rest of it. In the autopsy room they saw a tuft of hair coming out of where the head should be and realized he hit the train head-on and his head had caved into his chest through his neck. Reminds me of an old high school prom promise presentation from the county coroner. One photo that he showed that he'll never forget is one where a car had wrecked. Heavy intrusion of the roof, which had effectively pancaked the driver's skull. Bloody and in pieces, but the skin held it together. Both eyeballs popped out and hanging too. Fucked me up at 14, yo. Edit, for those asking why, the rationale was that it would scare us enough to prevent any drunk driving. They only did this presentation once. I do remember a few students passing out in the auditorium from the gore. One slide was a motorcycle rider with his body draped over the guardrail, but his head sitting perfectly upright on the pavement 10 feet away. Reminds me of this story. I live on a small island near Japan, so we have Japanese tourists visit all the time. We have this popular beach which is listed as our top 3 tourist attractions. You had to climb down some stairs, as well as a ladder. Then you'd have to jump down 5 feet onto the sand, or water, to reach the bottom, or you could jump off the cliff straight into the water. The jump from the main cliff was just 15 to 20 feet. The thing about this beach is that when it gets rough, the waves hit the cliff sides. And when they do, they reach astounding heights. The waves would get so big that it'll reach the parking lot, which is about 35 feet away from the secondary cliff side. One summer, this Japanese male in his mid-20s, seemed like an adrenaline junkie, went diving head-on into the waves when they were still mild. Still super dangerous, but mild compared to the waves that reach heights. Well, the next day or so, word had spread that he had passed. The locals said he was diving into the waves. Even after they advised him to stop, the guy would jump into the waves from the cliff, climb the ladder and stairs back to the top and jump right back in. The locals said they saw him jump repeatedly. Until he didn't. They called the police. Police arrived, but couldn't do much for a while because the water was still very rough. The mist, salt in the air, and sand mixed within the waves made it hard to see. They had to wait a couple of hours for the water to calm. They searched for his body and eventually found him in the waters of a nearby beach. He was headless. His body had almost split completely in the middle and legs were broken. They came to the conclusion that the waves had pushed him against the cliff head-on, so hard, that his head was pushed into his own body as well. The rest of his injuries were because he was still being slammed against the cliff sides for hours. There's a Japanese gravestone on the side of the beach. Always walked past, but hadn't learned the story until I got older. I had always thought it was a small World War II monument or something. Guess not. Police detective here. In a rural area, a guy had passed away in his yard. In July. It was 8 days before someone found him. He was partially liquefied, there were flies everywhere and the stench was quite nasty. Knowing where this fly was before they landed on your face did not help. Had to shovel him in the bag with gas masks. FYI, liquid people are quite toxic. Why does a dead body liquefy in the heat? It depends on the conditions people die. Had a guy hang himself in the woods near a village in the winter. He was pretty skinny and old, maybe decided to end it himself. After 4 days out in the cold wind he was basically a human jerky. If there is a lot of underskin fat and humidity, drowning in a well, the fat becomes soap-like. If a blanket falls over the wood stove you will die from carbon monoxide poisoning, as most blankets are synthetic material. It will keep smoking throughout the night, while the temperature in the room keeps rising, basically slow cooking you. I get a lot of stories like that. I'm not a crime scene cleanup crew, but I did have to clean up my father's brains and blood from the room he killed himself in. The people basically just didn't do a thorough job. There were red streaks down the hallway walls from the blood-soaked bed being taken out, and it's like they didn't have a ladder because the walls of the room were clean until nearly the roof, then you could see splatters. I found a piece of rotted, I'm pretty sure, brain stuck to the top of the curtain rails. There was also a smell we believe was from the blood soaking into the wooden floors, so we had to have those floors replaced. A doctor I used to work with at an urgent care drove to a big hospital and parked. Called them, told them he was sitting in the lot and what his car looked like. He said he was going to commit suicide and wanted them to harvest his organs. He immediately hung up and shot himself in the head. When they got to him, the entire inside of the car was wrapped with saran wrap. I'd assume it was an easier cleanup. My dad's friend is a cop who works in a rural area and loves to tell my dad about the fucked up stuff he's come across. One of them being the time he was sent to a call of a large group of people crying and coughing in an apartment. He gets there and it's a large group of family members there cleaning up the shotgun suicide of a relative. That's when I learned that it's sometimes up to the family of the departed to clean up after the death, and it's not always people in hazmat suits. Unfortunately, it's the majority of the time. Small towns don't have specialized crews for that. My town doesn't. I nearly had to clean up after I had found my dad dead back in March. He was home alone, had a heart attack and was dead before he hit the floor, but broke his nose on contact since he didn't put his arms out. He bled everywhere. It went through the hardwood floor and all down the walls in the basement too. It was awful, but some friends from church thought it would be better if I didn't have to go through more trauma as just a 20 guy who lost the only sane relative he had left. I'm not a professional cleaner, but I have cleaned a murder scene before, unfortunately. My best friend was beaten to death with a baseball bat in his home. It's apparently pretty expensive to have these people come out and clean, and his parents didn't have it. Trying to do what we could to help out, a few of his friends got together to clean it. I don't have anything crazier to say that I haven't already about the scene. The entire experience was extremely surreal and not something I think about often. I'd say the craziest thing would have to be the weird places we'd find a speck of blood with seemingly no logical way for it to have gotten there. Logic, of course, had left that room before we got there. Does doing one on accident count? I used to do auto detailing in college for a car dealership. I was scrubbing the floor of a car and no matter what I did the water kept having a red tint to it. So I pulled the seats and found about an inch of dried crusted blood and what I can only guess was brain matter/skull fragments. Turns out it was a suicide car that the dealership bought at auction. It had been detailed before being sold, but they never pulled the seats. We called the cops to confirm it was all logged and shipped the car back to auction. The dealership lost their ass on it but wanted it as far away from their lot as possible. A friend of mine is a cop. He just told me of a guy they found dead in his kitchen. The stove and heater were on and he was naked. They assumed he was just cooking while naked. You know, how we all do from time to time. Can't remember how long he said he was dead for. When they lifted him up to turn him around, his penis had sort of melted to the kitchen floor. As they pulled him upwards, the dangling participle stretched off the floor like a rubber band and released, slingshotting back to the body. It sounded absolutely disgusting as he described it.